So often our kids are expecting the pressure from their parents. And when we all of a sudden don't give them the pressure, when we just say, hey, are you hungry? What do you want for dinner? And then we give them presents, that's a whole different ballgame. No pun intended, right?
Welcome to the High Vibe Life podcast, where we are obsessed with all things manifestation, neuroscience, personal growth, and quite simply, living a life beyond our wildest dreams. I'm Moira, author, speaker, podcaster, manifestation, and mindset master. Since getting sober 25 years ago, I've helped tens of thousands of women break through and achieve massive levels of wealth, joy, and freedom. Now it's your turn. Let's dig in.
Welcome back to the High Vibe Life podcast with me, your host, Moira Casava. We are going to dig into one of my all-time favorite topics today, mental performance for athletes, specifically our kids. This is probably a question I get asked in every single gym I walk in, every single competition, tournament, whatever it is. People are always coming up to me asking me, how can they best support their children in this world that we live in, which is so highly competitive. I was an athlete when I was younger. Both of my kids are just crazy athletes, but crazy involved in sports, I should say, more importantly. I've got a daughter who's 15 that plays club volleyball, school volleyball, competes at a high level, competed in dance her whole life. My son is in the middle of a very important recruitment year for him for baseball. So we have been navigating this crazy world of sports, of children's sports, for years and years and years. And if you've been in it, you've seen the crazy that I've seen. You've seen parents on the sidelines losing their ever-living mind. You have definitely seen, I'm sure, a lot of parents that are trying to live through their children. This is not a judgment episode whatsoever. I have messed up and said things that I should have never said. We've all done things that we regret, right? We've all said things that we regret. This episode is more just of what I've learned through my training. So I'm trained in mental performance for athletes. I'm also trained in neurolinguistic programming. I have a lot of certifications, but specific to sports and athletes, I have those certifications obviously as well. I'm going to link actually the certification agency that I went through. It's called Brian Kane that runs it. His name is Brian Kane, and his mental performance is so top notch. It's so incredible. It's such an amazing program, not only for people that want to learn it, but also more importantly for the athlete. So my son has actually worked with some of his mental performance coaches one-on-one, because parents, as you know, they don't always want to hear it from us. I'll never forget the first coach that I set my son up with. It wasn't through Brian's program. It was a different one. And I kind of had my ear at the door when they started their call. I wanted to just listen in. And his coach was like, man, Finn, what is it like to have a mom that does this work for a living, that's in this space? And he was like, fine. Like it was no impact, or maybe everything that I had shared with him wasn't permeating his brain. I don't know. We know some of it does, but I know as a mama that I am not his greatest teacher when it comes to this. That, it's kind of the age-old example of, like, if I was a high school math teacher, he's probably not going to learn math from me. He's better off learning it from somebody else. So that's kind of just one thing I want to share out of the gate. But I've got some notes because I really wanted to dig into what is the most important thing? How is it that we come alongside our children? What are some of the most important things to say after a game, especially when they've had a really tough game, when maybe they're in a slump, when their confidence has taken a hit? Those are those magic moments where, if we're just equipped with a few key phrases or a few tips, it can really make all the difference. And like I said, I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. I had to learn all this. But mental performance is literally probably the thing I get fired up about the most, because I know that it is the kid that has the mental performance game that is going to win out. every single time. When you get to the super high level of maybe it's club sports, maybe it's college sports, D1, D2, even, MLB, you're talking professional sports. Gosh, they all have almost identical physical attributes, meaning like physical games, right? They've all shot thousands of free throws. They've all been at the plate thousands of times. They've all put in the reps. We can teach at a young age that, you can outwork other people, but you get to a certain stage in the game where everybody's working at an insane level. And the winning edge is really what you can handle mentally. All right. So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day that works specifically with kids. And I was just talking to him actually about my son. And I was like, he's frustrated. He doesn't feel like he's necessarily like where he's supposed to be, team wise, blah, 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 blah. And he said something that I just loved so much. He said, we compete with a standard, not a scoreboard. We compete with a standard, not a scoreboard. So I want to give you that little nugget first because, guys, it applies across the board. It applies to us as adults just in life, that we're not competing with our circumstances, right? We might be playing a team that's not any good. And so our nature would be like, I don't really have to try as hard. I don't have to prep as much. I don't have to do the visualization techniques. I don't have to put that much effort in. But we are competing with our standard, which we set for ourselves, and we have to know what the standard is, not the scoreboard, not the circumstances, right? We should be thinking about that every day in our life. So I love, that's one of my favorite expressions. But what I want to do today is really give you a few things, really two. I mean, I like to drill down and make things so simple that when you get in the car after a game and your kid is crying or they aren't talking to you at all because they're so frustrated, you know how to support them best as a parent. So one of the best things, another phrase that you can kind of lock into your mind, I always call them brain tattoos, is presence over pressure. Presence over pressure, not only thinking to yourself, okay, I just need to be present instead of putting the pressure on, but also just knowing that your physical presence goes way further than words, right? Just being in the car with them, taking them out to dinner, sitting there that night and maybe just watching a movie together. Your simple presence is going to go so much further to comfort them, to create a safe space for them. We as parents want to fill that space with all the words and all the direction and all the coaching and all the tips. And that's not always what we need to be doing. Just know that sometimes presence over pressure is enough. Okay. So one of my favorite expressions, I actually said it right when we started this out because I say it all the time, to come alongside our children, meaning don't come at them. Right? When I had little kids and I heard that as a new mom, I was like, oh my gosh, that energetically shifts the entire direction, right? The entire vibe, the entire interaction. To come alongside my children when my gut reaction is to come at them, right? I'm frustrated with their reaction. I'm frustrated with their behavior. And it's not always something we think about in the world of sports because we are trying to come alongside them. But what we have to realize is so often we're not coming alongside them. We're coming at them. And if you've read any parenting books, they actually talk about how much more effective it is when you're physically actually alongside your child. Like you will communicate better and they will receive more of what you're sharing if you're side by side in a car or if you're shooting hoops in the driveway where you're not saying like, sit down, son, I've got to talk to you about something and you're coming at them, right? So always have in your mind to come alongside your child versus at them, and coming alongside them so often is just your presence. All right, so here's the two things I really want you to take with you that you know that you'll be equipped with, like, okay, I know what I'm thinking and I know what to say and I know what to do in this situation. So the first thing is what I call like this 3-point spectrum. Your child is either going to get in the car and be somewhere on the spectrum between I suck, I'm terrible, we lost because of me, I'm horrible, I'm never going to play again, like utter downward spiral of confidence Versus the other end of the spectrum, they've won, they're happy, they think they're a rock star, they're amazing, which we all know we wish we could experience that more, right? And then in the middle usually lies just reality. And what we want to often get them to is a place of reality that the situation, and this is also a leadership lesson, that effective leaders, they don't make the situation better than it is, and they don't make the situation worse than it is. They deliver the truth, okay? So I want you to think about that spectrum and kind of identify, okay, I know this spectrum. Where is my child right now? Where are they on that spectrum? And where do I kind of need to edge them back to? And we all know that 90% of the time they are on the negative side of the spectrum, and we're trying to bring them back to center. And the reason I give you this perspective of the spectrum is we tend to say things like, it's not a big deal, or it's just a game, or focus on the good. Like, we tend to take them from that negative end of the spectrum and almost not hear what they're saying and just kind of like overwhelm it with like, don't be ridiculous. It's just a game. Stop. We don't validate their emotions. And so we can't go from one end of the spectrum to the other. We got to bring them into the middle. And so sometimes the best question to ask, and I'm going to kind of give you all of this in one nutshell because I can't talk about, this first point without talking about the second point. Initially, in that first moment where they step into the car, they walk up to you after the game, and they're frustrated and they're struggling. This is literally my go-to question because I know the best thing is not for me to critique the game, not for me to ask how they're feeling in that initial moment. So my go-to is literally, are you ready? I say, are you hungry? What do you want to eat? Completely dismiss the game. Get their mind just away from it. So often our kids are expecting the pressure from their parents. And when we all of a sudden don't give them the pressure, when we just say, hey, are you hungry? What do you want for dinner? And then we give them presents, that's a whole different ballgame. No pun intended, right? So that's initial. That's what I want you to think about. What question initially can you ask that has nothing to do with their performance? Then we get into the space of, okay, after some time, and this is really hard for parents, but give it some time. Give it some time. Start to ask other questions to move them on the spectrum of, hey, do you want to talk about this or not at all? And 9 times out of 10, my kids don't want to talk about it in that moment. They're not ready for that conversation, right? And what I used to do in the past was just launch into the conversation, and they're not ready for it. They're not in a space where they want to talk about it. So 9 times out of 10, we just go to dinner. And I want you to think about that too. I want you to think about like, okay, well, we're going to sit down to dinner and we're going to talk about the game. No, talk about other things, right? Let them lead. I think that is the most important thing, is ask the questions, allow them the space. But if they don't want to talk about other things. So how do we move them on that spectrum, right? I want to talk about the extreme where if they are in that dangerous kind of place, and I just mean dangerous for their self-confidence, of the extremist thinking, right? It's all my fault. We lost because of me. I'm terrible. I suck. Da, 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 da. You can just validate the truth. Remember when I said effective leaders, they don't, blow up the downfall. They don't over dramatize things, but they don't paint the picture better than it is. They're not looking through what is the expression? Rose-colored glasses, something like that. They tell it like it is. So if your child is on the end of the spectrum where they're in that downward spiral, you can say something just very matter of fact, like, you and I both know that's not true. We know that's not true. And what happened is X, Y, and Z. State the truth. Don't jump to the other end of the spectrum. And then if they're not on that end of the spectrum, where if they're just a little irritated, they're frustrated, their confidence is taking a little bit of a hit, they're in a slump, that, start to ask questions if they do want to dissect it a little bit, like, what do you think you could have done? What would you do differently next time? Is there anything that you think you would go back and do differently. Just ask them questions that set them up for success in the next game, in the next inning, in the next tournament. And so help them start to navigate even some of those conversations that they might be able to have where they come to the awareness with you of like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that. Maybe I could do this differently. Maybe I could do that differently. So that maybe opens up a conversation between them and their coach, right? Where they're strategizing success instead of walking into the gym or onto the field with their tail between their legs, feeling ashamed of their performance from the previous game. So the last thing I want to say, and I don't want this to come across as me, hopping like I talked about from the negative end of the spectrum to the positive. But one of the things that I see all the time in sports, and this is really my neurolinguistic programming background, is the tone of parents and the words that they're using and what that is assuming or inferring to the child. For instance, if you have a kid that say they're pitching and, you're saying things like, you got it, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, shake it off. You're saying that was bad, what you just did was terrible. And you're validating what they're feeling. They're feeling like they're not performing in the moment. And your tone and the words that you're choosing is actually reaffirming that for them, right? So trying to shift not only the tone, but the language of just that little bit of a lift in tone of like, you got this, kid, this is who you are, like show them what you got. That type of language, which is showing them their identity as a winner versus what they're feeling in the moment as their identity as not a winner, right? And so I see this all the time, and this is something, even in language, in conversation around the home, where you could maybe say something, and I'll go back to baseball as an example, like, why do you think you struck out twice? Or, I know you're, like, parents will even say, I know you're in a slump. Like, telling them they're in a slump is the worst thing possible. You want to reaffirm who they are overall. So one of the mindset strategies that I teach, I always talk about it coming from the microscope to the telescope, meaning they are looking through a microscope and they are looking at those last 5 pitches or those last 2 games. And that is the only thing your child is seeing, is how they messed up. And so often, again, because we're not just making something up like you're amazing and, you're a home run hitter and they've never hit a home run. We're pulling out to the telescope view to see it all and saying like, hey, you know what? Just get back to your regular nature. And like, you can finish, say they went 0 for 3, but they've got all these games ahead of them. Be like, listen, dude, you can finish like, 15 out of 18 hits. Like, and not the pressure that you got to get a hit every time, but like, if you look at this big picture, you're not behind the 8 ball yet. You still got plenty of time. And so a lot of times what I will say to my son, who really, I think struggles, I would say like mentally, he's just so hard on himself. And so I'm constantly speaking his true identity. I'm like, dude, you got like the big hitter award in this grade. You did this in 9th grade. Like you hit it out of the park on this team. Like he is a home run hitter. Like he's a big hitter, right? Like even when I talk to people and they're like, what position does he play? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, he's a big hitter. Like that's his strength. He's a big hitter. And he does not feel that every day. I know that he does not feel that every day. And so I'm constantly speaking that over him versus, oh, you're in a slump right now. How does that feel? And so language is key. Tone is key. Reality is key. Asking questions, coming alongside them, giving them your presence, simply asking, are you hungry? What do you want for dinner? Right? Those are some simple tips and tricks that are going to, I believe, completely shift it in those car rides home. I have driven home. We probably all have if you're listening to this. I can't tell you how many tournaments I've driven home from that are literally 3-4 hours, sometimes 5-6 hours. And we don't mention a word about the game. We don't mention a word about the entire tournament because I know that he or she just needs that car ride to like decompress, think about something else. They're thinking about it, right? I know that, but it's not the time or place. And maybe it's a day or two later. Every child is different. So think about that spectrum, identifying on that spectrum, where is my child right now? And what can I do to bring them back to truth, bring them back to center? What can I do to give them my presence so they feel presence over pressure? And remember what I said in the beginning, teaching our children that they need to compete with a standard that they know that they've decided on for themselves, that they are going to hold themselves to, competing with a standard, not a scoreboard and not a circumstance. I hope this helps you so much. This is my favorite topic in the world. I love nothing more than working with kids and athletes. So if you have questions, reach out to me. I'm going to link a ton of stuff in the show notes. I'm going to link my last podcast episode that I did with Brian Kane. I'm going to link his resources where you can find a mental performance coach. And I know that there were other things before we hit record that I was thinking, I've got to give him this and this and this. So just access the show notes, reach out to me on Instagram, share this, please share this episode with a parent because we all want healthier children in that mental performance zone. And thanks for joining. We'll see you next week.